the environment makes it smoother and more automatic. Consistency doesn't come from pushing yourself. Most of the time, it comes from designing the world around you so the right choice becomes the easy choice. A single environmental change can be the start of a steady, reliable habit that grows with almost no effort. Chapter 6. Friction and Flow. Friction, in the context of behavior, is anything that makes an action feel harder to start or harder to continue. It's the small barriers, delays, annoyances, or extra steps that get between you and the habit you want to build. Even tiny obstacles, like having to look for your shoes, open a cluttered drawer, or switch apps on your phone, can drain your energy and reduce your chances of following through. Friction doesn't have to be big to have an impact. A few seconds of inconvenience can be enough to push you toward an easier option, even if that option isn't good for you. When something takes effort, your brain notices the resistance and tries to avoid it. This is why people skip workouts, avoid tasks, or fall back into old habits. The friction is simply higher for the good choice than for the unhelpful one. Understanding friction is powerful because it gives you control. When you lower the friction for good habits, they become easier to start. When you increase the friction for bad habits, they naturally fade away. By shaping your environment to reduce resistance, you allow your behavior to change with less force and more flow. Reducing friction makes good habits easier to start, easier to repeat, and easier to stick with. When you remove the tiny obstacles that slow you down, the action feels lighter, smoother, and more natural. You no longer have to fight against resistance every time you try to do the right thing. Instead, the path becomes almost effortless. When friction is low, your brain doesn't have to negotiate or debate with itself. There's no long pause before beginning. There's no extra step that steals your energy. You simply do the habit because nothing is standing in your way. This is why setting out clothes the night before makes morning exercise easier, or why preparing ingredients ahead of time makes healthy eating more consistent. You're not suddenly more disciplined. You've just removed the slowdown points. Lower friction also preserves your mental energy. When a habit takes less effort to begin, you save the willpower you would have spent pushing yourself into action. That leftover energy then becomes momentum. You feel good about starting, so you're more likely to continue. You feel capable, so the habit starts to stick. Over time, reducing friction transforms a habit from something you should do into something you simply do. The easier the behavior becomes, the more it integrates into your daily life. By smoothing the path, you make your habits feel like the natural next step instead of a heavy obligation. Even tiny obstacles can prevent action because the human brain is always looking for the easiest possible path. When you face even a small inconvenience, like having to find your keys, open a crowded drawer, or switch apps, your mind instantly weighs the effort against the reward. If something feels even slightly harder than another option, your brain often chooses the easier path without much thought. That tiny bit of resistance is enough to interrupt the flow and make you hesitate. Hesitation might last only a moment, but that moment is powerful. It gives your mind time to second guess, delay, or talk itself out of the task. A 2-second inconvenience can turn into 10 minutes of procrastination. A missing pen can stop you from journaling. A distant water bottle can keep you from drinking more water. The obstacle may be small, but its effects grow quickly. Tiny obstacles also stack up emotionally. Each bit of friction adds a sense of annoyance, stress, or mental load. Your brain doesn't see these as separate issues. It feels them collectively. When enough small barriers pile up, you feel overwhelmed, even if the tasks themselves are simple. This is why clearing clutter, preparing ahead, or simplifying your environment creates such a big improvement. In the end, small obstacles matter because they quietly drain your momentum. They interrupt the moment when you're ready to act. By removing even the tiniest barriers, you make it far more likely that you'll follow through, and far less likely that hesitation will stop you. Friction shows up everywhere, in your mornings, your work, your health, and even your relationships. It often hides in small moments that seem harmless, but quietly make life harder. When these tiny barriers add up, they drain your energy and slow your progress without you realizing why. In the morning, friction might look like not knowing what to wear, searching for your bag, or rushing through a messy kitchen. Each small delay creates stress and makes the day feel heavy before it even begins. A simple fix, like laying out clothes the night before or keeping your essentials in one spot, removes that morning resistance and helps you start the day calm and confident. At work, the friction can appear in the form of a cluttered desk, scattered files, or too many notifications. When you have to hunt for information or switch tasks constantly, your focus breaks again and again. This makes even easy tasks feel difficult. But when you reduce friction, by organizing your workspace, turning off unnecessary alerts, or planning your day, you create smoother flow and clearer thinking. In health, friction often hides in preparation. You might want to cook healthy meals, but if your fridge is unorganized or ingredients aren't ready, the friction pushes you toward faster, less healthy options. Exercise becomes harder if your workout clothes are buried in a drawer or your equipment is out of reach. Making health easier is as simple as lowering barriers, preparing ingredients, keeping a water bottle nearby, or placing workout clothes where you can't miss them. In relationships, friction appears when communication becomes slightly inconvenient. If talking requires long explanations, scheduling becomes complicated, or the environment feels tense, people pull back. Even tiny emotional barriers, like feeling unheard or misunderstood, create friction that weakens connection. Reducing this friction means making space for easy, honest communication and showing small daily gestures of care. These tiny acts remove the emotional resistance that builds distance. Across every part of life, friction is the hidden force that either slows you down or supports you. When you lower the friction in your environment, your routines, and your interactions, you make progress feel natural. You make growth feel achievable. And you make your days smoother, lighter, and far more consistent. Increasing friction for bad habits means making them harder, slower, or less convenient to do. When you add small obstacles between yourself and the behavior you want to avoid, the habit loses its power. Your brain naturally chooses the easier path, so if the bad habit becomes even slightly more difficult, you're far less likely to repeat it. One simple way to increase friction is to add extra steps. If you want to cut down on junk food, you can store it on a high shelf or in a different room. Now you have to get up, move around, and reach for it. That tiny bit of effort interrupts the automatic impulse. It gives you enough time to rethink the choice. Another method is to create distance. If social media wastes your time, you can log out after each use or remove the app from your home screen. Suddenly, opening it requires extra taps or a password. Those few seconds break the habit loop and make you more aware of what you're doing. You can also change the environment so the bad habit feels out of place. If you tend to lie in bed and scroll, keep your phone across the room at night. If you watch too much TV, unplug it or hide the remote in a drawer. The small inconvenience forces you to be intentional instead of automatic. Increasing friction can also mean replacing the bad habit's trigger with a healthier cue. If you snack when you're bored, keep fruit or water within reach and store unhealthy snacks out of sight. Now, boredom leads to a better choice because the easier option is also the healthier one. The goal isn't to make life difficult. It's to make the bad habit slightly harder than the good habit. When you raise friction for the actions you want to avoid, you give yourself the space to choose differently. Over time, the bad habit fades because it loses its convenience, its speed, and its place in your everyday life. Friction mapping exercise. This exercise helps you clearly see where friction is hiding in your daily life and how small changes can make your habits easier. Take your time, be honest, and write your answers directly on the lines. Step 1. Identify a habit you want to build or break. Write the habit you struggle with and why it matters to you. Step 2. List every point of friction. Write down all the tiny obstacles that make this habit harder to start or easier to avoid. Step 3. Mark the worst friction point. Circle the one obstacle that slows you down the most. Then write why it affects you. Step 4. Plan 1. Friction removing change. Decide on one small adjustment you can make today to remove or reduce that friction. Step 5. Add one friction increasing change for a bad habit. Write one way you can make the unwanted habit slightly harder, slower, or less convenient. Step 6. Reflect on how these changes will help. Describe how lowering friction for the good habit and raising friction for the bad habit will shift your behavior. Use this friction map anytime you feel stuck. Even one small adjustment can make the right action feel smoother and far more achievable. Simplicity and flow are deeply connected because the mind works best when it isn't overloaded. When things are simple, your tasks, your space, your choices, your brain can move smoothly from one action to the next without getting stuck. Flow happens when you feel fully absorbed, focused, and engaged in what you're doing. And simplicity creates the conditions that make that possible. When life is complicated, your attention gets scattered. Too many choices make you hesitate. Too many steps make you slow down. Too much clutter, mental or physical, creates noise that interrupts your focus. Even small interruptions break the rhythm you're trying to build. Complexity steals the mental energy you need to slip into flow. But when everything is simplified, your mind feels clear. You know exactly what to do next, because there's no confusion or decision fatigue. Your environment supports you instead of distracting you. The task feels lighter because the path is clean. With fewer obstacles, your attention settles naturally on the work in front of you. Simplicity also reduces resistance. When something is easy to begin, it's easier to stay in motion. This is why athletes, artists, and top performers often talk about getting into the zone. They set up their environment, routines, and tools so well that starting becomes effortless. And when starting is effortless, continuing becomes almost automatic. Flow thrives in clarity. It grows in calm, open space. It deepens when your mind has room to breathe. The simpler you make your life, your systems, your surroundings, your habits, the more often you can reach that state where everything just clicks and the work feels smooth. Simplicity isn't just about having less. It's about creating the conditions where focus and progress can naturally flow. Emma used to start every morning the same way, rushed, scattered, and already behind. She would wake up late, stumble through a messy bedroom, and spend the first 10 minutes searching for her clothes, her keys, or her headphones. By the time she finally sat down to work, she felt drained, frustrated, and unfocused. She believed she had a motivation problem. But the truth was simpler. Friction was stealing her productivity before her day even began. One Sunday evening, she decided she was tired of feeling overwhelmed. She didn't try to change everything at once. Instead, she picked one tiny thing. She laid out her clothes for the next morning on a chair by the door. It took less than a minute, but she felt a small sense of relief just looking at them. The next day, she got dressed without thinking, and the morning felt a little smoother. Encouraged, she made one more change. She cleared her desk, just the surface, removing the old receipts, tangled chargers, and random papers that always distracted her. Suddenly, her workspace felt calm. When she sat down the next morning, her mind didn't jump to clutter. It went straight to her work. Her focus lasted longer than usual, and she finished a task faster than she expected. Over the next week, Emma kept lowering friction in tiny ways. She kept her water bottle filled and next to her laptop. She placed her running shoes near the door so her evening walk became automatic. She organized her digital files so she didn't waste time hunting for documents. Each change was small, but each one removed a moment of hesitation, a pause, or a burst of stress. The difference surprised her. She felt lighter. She no longer wasted time deciding what to do next because her environment quietly guided her. Her mornings became smoother, her workdays more focused, and her evenings more relaxed. She realized that productivity wasn't about pushing herself harder. It was about removing the tiny obstacles that slowed her down. By the end of the month, Emma wasn't just more productive. She was more confident. Every small victory made her believe she could shape her life piece by piece. The friction around her had faded, and with it, the constant resistance she used to feel. She had unlocked a new level of daily flow simply by making her environment work for her instead of against her. Maintaining flow on busy days is less about controlling everything and more about protecting small pockets of clarity. When your schedule is full, your mind naturally pulls in different directions. Tasks compete for attention, people need things from you, and interruptions appear without warning. Flow becomes difficult, not because you're incapable, but because chaos keeps breaking your rhythm. The goal is to create simple anchors that hold your focus steady, even when the day gets hectic. One way to stay in flow is to define your one essential task for the day. When you know the single thing that matters most, your mind has a clear target. Even if the day becomes crowded, you always know what to return to. This clarity acts like a compass, guiding you back to focus whenever you get pulled away. Another key is protecting small blocks of uninterrupted time. You don't need hours. Sometimes 10 or 15 minutes is enough to reconnect with your work. During that window, silence your notifications, close extra tabs, and let yourself sink into the task. This short burst of focus can carry you through the busiest days because it rebuilds momentum and reduces mental clutter. It also helps to reset your environment throughout the day. A quick desk tidy, a deep breath, or a short walk can refresh your mind and bring you back into flow. These resets wipe away the scattered feeling that comes from constant activity. They give your brain a clean slate to refocus instead of drowning in noise. Another powerful strategy is batching small tasks together. When you group similar tasks, emails, messages, errands, you reduce the mental switching that kills flow. Handling these tasks all at once keeps your attention from bouncing around, saving energy and maintaining calm. Finally, maintaining flow means being kind to yourself. Busy days come with unexpected shifts, and flow doesn't require perfection. As long as you keep returning to your essential task, protect pockets of focus, and lower friction where you can, you'll stay grounded despite the chaos. Even on the most overwhelming days, you can create moments of steady, meaningful progress. Emotional friction is the hidden force that makes even simple actions feel heavy. It has nothing to do with the task itself, and everything to do with how you feel about it. When emotions like fear, doubt, stress, or embarrassment get in the way, they create a layer of resistance that slows you down before you even begin. You might know exactly what to do, but the moment you try to start, your feelings pull you back. Sometimes emotional friction shows up as fear of failure. You hesitate because you worry the result won't be good enough. Other times it appears as self-doubt. Your mind whispers that you're not ready, not capable, or not the kind of person who succeeds at this. Even small actions feel risky when your emotions add weight to them. Stress can create emotional friction too. When your mind is overloaded, even easy tasks feel overwhelming. You avoid them not because they're difficult, but because you don't have the emotional space to handle one more thing. The task becomes tied to stress, and your brain tries to protect you by pushing it away. Emotional friction can also come from past experiences. If you failed at something before, your mind might replay that memory every time you try again. A harmless task becomes emotionally charged, and starting feels unsafe. What makes emotional friction so powerful is that it happens quietly. You don't always notice the emotion. You only notice the delay, the avoidance, or the sudden urge to do anything else. It feels like procrastination, but underneath it is discomfort your brain wants to escape. Reducing emotional friction means making the feelings lighter. You can break tasks into tiny steps so they feel less intimidating. You can give yourself permission to start imperfectly. You can speak to yourself with more kindness instead of criticism. When the emotional weight drops, action becomes easier. Once the emotions soften, even the smallest step can create momentum. You feel capable again. You feel calmer. You feel in control. And with each step, the emotional friction loses its grip, making the path forward smoother than before. Chapter 7. Rewriting automatic patterns. Automatic behaviors form through repetition. When you repeat the same action over and over, your brain begins to recognize the pattern and makes it easier to perform. At first, a new habit takes effort. You have to think about each step, remind yourself to start, and push through any discomfort. But as you repeat the behavior, your brain starts to connect the cue, the action, and the outcome. This connection becomes stronger each time you follow the same sequence. Inside your brain, a pathway forms. In the beginning, it's weak, like a small trail in a field. Every time you repeat the behavior, you walk that trail again, pressing it deeper into the ground. Over time, the trail becomes a clear path. Eventually, it becomes the default route your brain takes without thinking. This is when the behavior becomes automatic. Your brain loves automatic behaviors because they save energy. Thinking takes effort, but habits run on autopilot. This is why brushing your teeth, tying your shoes, or checking your phone require almost no mental effort. You've repeated them so many times that your brain can perform them even while your thoughts are somewhere else. Cues play a big role in creating automatic behavior. A cue is anything that triggers the habit, a time of day, a place, an emotion, or an action. When the cue appears, your brain remembers the habit attached to it. With enough repetition, the cue alone can make you start the behavior without any conscious decision. Automatic behaviors don't form overnight. They grow from tiny, consistent actions repeated across days, weeks, and months. The more often you perform the behavior, the quicker it settles into your routine. And once a habit becomes automatic, it becomes part of your identity, something you do naturally and effortlessly, simply because it has become who you are. One common negative automatic pattern people fall into is the habit of reaching for their phone whenever they feel even a hint of boredom, discomfort, or stress. It starts small. Maybe you check it while waiting in line, during a commercial break, or right before bed. At first, it feels harmless, just a quick distraction. But over time, the behavior repeats so often that it becomes automatic. Your hand moves before you even think. The phone becomes the default response to any pause in their day. What makes this pattern so powerful is that it attaches itself to emotions. Instead of sitting with boredom, your brain learns to escape it. Instead of facing a tough task, you scroll for a minute. Instead of dealing with stress, you numb it with endless stimulation. Each time you do this, the loop strengthens. Boredom, pick up phone. Stress, pick up phone. Avoidance, pick up phone. The cue and the action fuse together. This automatic pattern slowly reshapes your behavior. You lose long stretches of time without noticing. Tasks take longer because your focus keeps breaking. You feel mentally scattered, and your attention feels shorter than before. The phone becomes a reflex instead of a choice. What's tricky is that the pattern doesn't feel dramatic. It sneaks in quietly. You don't decide to use your phone as a coping tool. It simply becomes one. And because the habit forms automatically, it becomes difficult to control without intentional changes. Breaking this pattern starts with noticing it. When you become aware of the moments that trigger the urge, you can interrupt the loop and build a better response. But as long as the behavior stays automatic, it keeps pulling you in the same direction, without your permission and without your awareness. Awareness is the moment the autopilot switch flips off. Most negative habits operate in the background, running on well-worn loops that the brain triggers without thinking. You reach for snacks when you're stressed, scroll when you're bored, avoid tasks when they feel uncomfortable, not because you consciously choose to, but because the pattern has been rehearsed so many times that it fires automatically. When awareness enters the picture, everything changes, not because the habit disappears instantly, but because you finally see it. Awareness inserts a pause between the cue and the response. It gives you the space to ask, do I actually want to do this? That pause is powerful. Even if you still follow the old behavior, you're now aware that a choice exists. Awareness also interrupts the emotional autopilot. When you notice that you're procrastinating because you feel overwhelmed, or reaching for your phone because you're anxious, you gain the ability to address the real cause instead of reacting blindly. The emotion no longer controls the action. Over time, this repeated act of noticing weakens the automatic loop. Each moment of awareness is like a small cut in the old wiring. The brain starts to build new roots. The habit loses its grip. You begin choosing instead of reacting. Awareness doesn't solve everything, but it is always the first step. Without it, autopilot can run your entire day. With it, you reclaim the steering wheel, one conscious moment at a time. Replacing an old pattern with a new one works best when the method is simple and repeatable. The goal is not to fight the old pattern, but to give your brain an easier one to follow. Here is a clear method anyone can use to swap out an unhelpful habit for a better one. Step 1. Identify the cue. Every pattern begins with a trigger, a time of day, a feeling, a place, or a situation. Notice what happens right before the habit starts. Maybe you overcheck your phone when you feel bored. Maybe you snack when you walk into the kitchen. Naming the cue is essential because it tells you when the swap needs to happen. Step 2. Define the new action. Your new pattern must be tiny, simple, and doable in less than a minute. If the old behavior is scroll when bored, the replacement might be take one deep breath or stand up and stretch. If it's eat junk when stressed, the replacement might be drink a glass of water first. The new action should be so easy that you can do it even on your worst day. Step 3. Connect the cue to the new behavior. This is where the swap happens. When the cue appears, you intentionally pause and perform the new action. You're teaching your brain a new sequence. Cue new behavior. At first, it will feel unnatural, but repetition turns it into a smoother pathway. Step 4. Reward the new pattern immediately. Humans repeat behaviors that feel good. After completing your new tiny action, give yourself a small positive feeling. Say, nice job, smile, or mentally note the win. This small reward helps your brain mark the new pattern as worth repeating. Step 5. Repeat until automatic. Every time you follow the new sequence, the old one weakens. The brain begins to default to the new behavior because it becomes familiar and easier. Over time, the replacement pattern becomes the automatic one. This method works because it doesn't rely on fighting urges or forcing willpower. Instead, it gently rewires your brain, one cue and one tiny action at a time. The brain prefers familiar routines because they save energy. Every decision you make, every new task you attempt, and every unfamiliar situation you face requires mental effort. The brain is always looking for ways to reduce that effort, so it leans toward patterns it already knows. Familiar routines feel easier, safer, and more predictable, which means the brain can run them with far less work. When the brain recognizes a routine, it doesn't need to analyze each step. It simply follows the pathway it has used many times before. This is why you can drive the same route home without remembering much of the trip, or why you reach for your phone the moment you wake up without thinking. These actions run automatically, freeing mental energy for other tasks. Familiar routines also give the brain a sense of control. When it knows what to expect, it feels stable. Change, even positive change, can feel risky because the brain must build new pathways and judge new outcomes. That process requires attention, learning, and discomfort. The brain naturally avoids discomfort unless you intentionally guide it in a new direction. This preference for the familiar is not a flaw, it's a survival feature. But it becomes a problem when familiar routines hold you back. Understanding this helps you treat change with patience. Your brain isn't resisting because you're weak. It's resisting because it's designed to conserve energy. The good news is that with enough repetition, any new behavior can become the familiar one the brain prefers. When that happens, growth becomes the new comfort zone. Maya used to start every morning on autopilot, and not in a way that helped her. As soon as her alarm rang, she would grab her phone, scroll through messages, check social media, and lose 20 minutes before she even got out of bed. By the time she finally stood up, she already felt behind, rushed, and irritated. This pattern ran so automatically that she barely noticed it happening. It was simply her routine. One day, she realized how drained she felt before the day had even begun. That moment of awareness was the turning point. Instead of grabbing her phone the next morning, she placed it on her dresser across the room the night before. This tiny change forced her to stand up to turn off the alarm. It broke the first link in her old chain. From there, she added one small replacement, a 2-minute stretch. Nothing complicated, just a way to gently wake her body and mind. At first it felt unfamiliar and a little awkward, but she kept doing it. The next week, she added a single deep breath before walking to the kitchen. Soon, she made herself a glass of water before touching her phone. Slowly, her new autopilot began to take shape. Wake up, stand up, stretch, breathe, hydrate. Each tiny step rewrote the script her brain had followed for years. The urge to reach for her phone faded because the new pattern took over the old one's place. Within a month, her mornings felt calmer. She had more energy, more clarity, and more control. She didn't transform her life with a dramatic overhaul. She did it by rewriting her autopilot one small action at a time. Emotional triggers are often the invisible switches that activate our patterns. You may think you're reacting to a situation, but most of the time, you're reacting to a feeling. Stress, boredom, loneliness, fear, frustration, or even excitement can push you into habits you didn't consciously choose. The emotion fires first, and the behavior follows almost instantly. Stress might trigger overeating or rushing through decisions. Boredom might lead you to scroll endlessly on your phone. Loneliness might push you to reach out to people who aren't good for you, simply because the familiar connection feels comforting. Fear might make you avoid tasks that matter, because doing nothing feels safer than taking a risk. These patterns form slowly, usually without you realizing it, until the emotion and the action feel tied together. What makes emotional triggers so powerful is that they bypass logic. When an emotion hits, the brain searches for the fastest way to feel better. It doesn't look for what's best. It looks for relief. If a habit has given even a moment of comfort in the past, the brain tries it again, even if the long-term cost is high. This is why people repeat actions they don't like. They aren't choosing the behavior, they're choosing the relief. But once you start noticing your emotional triggers, you gain control. When you can say, "I'm not actually hungry, I'm stressed," or "I'm not avoiding the task, I'm anxious," the loop begins to break. Awareness separates the emotion from the action long enough for you to choose a better response. Understanding your emotional triggers doesn't make them disappear, but it makes them predictable. And when something is predictable, it becomes manageable. With practice, you can replace old patterns with healthier ones, not by fighting your emotions, but by meeting them with clarity instead of autopilot. Trigger action result, mapping exercise. This exercise helps you see how your habits form a chain. By writing down your triggers, the actions they lead to, and the results that follow, you can understand your patterns more clearly and begin changing them with intention. Instructions. Identify one habit or reaction you want to understand better. Then fill in the 3 parts below. Your trigger. What emotion, situation, or cue starts the pattern? Action. What do you do automatically after the trigger appears? Result. What happens because of the action, both immediately and later? Repeat the mapping for a second. Trigger. Action. Result. Repeat for a third pattern. Trigger. Action. Result. Completing this exercise helps you see your habits as clear, predictable sequences, not mysterious or uncontrollable behaviors. Once the chain is visible, you can begin changing it one link at a time. Small interruptions are powerful because they slip into the middle of an unwanted cycle and break its rhythm. Most negative habits depend on momentum. They follow a predictable path that moves from trigger to action to result without much thought in between. When you interrupt that flow, even for a moment, the entire cycle loses its strength. Imagine you always snack when you feel stressed. Stress hits, you walk to the kitchen, and you grab something without thinking. If you add one tiny interruption, like pausing to drink a glass of water, you create a gap in the loop. That pause gives your brain time to think, instead of letting the habit run automatically. The urge may still be there, but the pattern is no longer smooth or automatic. Interruptions don't need to be dramatic. Standing up, taking one breath, counting to 5, stretching your hands, or saying out loud what you're feeling can all create just enough space to wake up your awareness. In that space, you can choose a different action. The interruption is the wedge that opens the door to change. Over time, these interruptions weaken the old pattern. Every time the cycle is broken, the habit pathway becomes a little less automatic. The brain learns that the old routine is no longer reliable, and it becomes easier to replace it with a healthier behavior. Small interruptions work not because they force change, but because they create the opportunity for it, one moment at a time. New patterns become automatic through repetition and familiarity. At first, a new behavior feels slow and awkward because the brain is still learning the steps. It has no pathway for the action yet, so it must use more focus and effort. This is why starting something new often feels tiring. You're teaching your brain something it hasn't practiced before. But every time you repeat the behavior, the brain strengthens the pathway linked to that action. Just like a trail in the woods becomes clearer each time the people walk it. The mental pathway becomes smoother as you use it again and again. Soon, the brain begins to recognize the pattern and predict what comes next. The more predictable the behavior becomes, the less effort it requires. Eventually, the new pattern shifts from something you do intentionally to something you do naturally. It begins to feel normal, comfortable, and familiar. The brain loves familiarity, so once the pattern is repeated enough, it will prefer the new routine over the old one. What used to require motivation becomes your default. This transformation doesn't happen in a single moment. It happens slowly, one repetition at a time, until the behavior no longer feels like a task. You simply do it. That's how small changes grow into automatic habits. Through steady practice, gentle consistency, and patience with the process. Chapter 8. The 2-minute triumph. Starting is more important than finishing, because nothing can be completed until it is first begun. Finishing may be the goal, but the beginning is the doorway that makes every goal possible. When you start, you move from imagination into reality. You break the spell of hesitation, doubt, and fear. You turn intention into momentum, and that shift is often the hardest part of any journey. Most people get stuck before they even begin. They wait to feel ready, confident, or motivated. They wait for a perfect plan or the perfect moment. But waiting keeps the mind trapped in thought instead of action. Starting breaks that trap. It shows your brain that movement is possible, even if it's small. Once you take the first step, the second step becomes easier, and the third feels more natural. The path begins to reveal itself through action, not planning. Starting also teaches you what finishing actually requires. You learn what works, what doesn't, what needs to change, and what you can improve. None of that learning happens when you're only thinking. Action creates clarity. The moment you begin, you switch from guessing to discovering. Even if you start imperfectly, you gain more progress than someone who never begins. Finishing is the reward, but starting is the spark. It is the turning point where dreams become movement, and movement becomes growth. When you choose to start, you unlock every possibility that comes after. Here are 10 simple 2-minute actions that can create quick momentum in different areas of life. Each one is small enough to start immediately, but strong enough to move you forward. Health. Fill a glass of water and drink it slowly to wake up your body. Fitness. Do a short stretch routine, reach for the ceiling, touch your toes, roll your shoulders. Mental clarity. Close your eyes and take 10 deep breaths to calm your mind. Home environment. Clear one small surface, like a nightstand or a counter corner. Finances. Check your bank balance or track one expense for the day. Relationships. Send a quick message to someone you care about. Thinking of you. Personal growth. Read one page of a book you want to learn from. Work or study. Set a timer and organize your workspace for 2 minutes. Creativity. Open a notebook and write one sentence or one idea. Stress management. Step outside, feel the air on your face, and take a single slow walk around the room or yard. These tiny actions may seem small, but they open the door to bigger habits by making the first step easy and doable. Small beginnings bypass resistance because they feel safe to the brain. When a task looks big, overwhelming, or time-consuming, your mind instantly puts up a wall of excuses. I don't have time. I'm too tired. Or, I'll do it later. This resistance isn't laziness. It's your brain trying to avoid discomfort and save energy. But when you shrink the task to something tiny, the resistance fades. A 2-minute start doesn't feel threatening. It doesn't trigger fear, pressure, or perfectionism. The brain thinks, I can do that. And the wall that once felt solid begins to soften. Starting becomes easier because the effort looks small enough to handle. These tiny beginnings also sneak past emotional resistance. If you've been avoiding something because it feels stressful or complicated, reducing it to a small first step lets you move without feeling overwhelmed. You're not trying to complete the entire goal. You're just trying to begin. One Once you take that small step, something important happens. The momentum builds. The very act of starting signals to your brain that the task isn't as difficult as it seemed. The resistance weakens further, and often you keep going naturally. What felt impossible minutes before suddenly feels manageable. Small beginnings work not by overpowering resistance, but by slipping around it. They turn mountains back into molehills and transform someday into right now, one small step at a time. A tiny start can create a domino effect that reaches far beyond the first small action. When you take a simple step, something so easy it barely feels like effort, you knock over the first domino in a long line of possibilities. That one motion sets everything else in motion. The power isn't in the size of the start. It's in the chain reaction it creates. Imagine you decide to tidy just one corner of your room. At first, it seems insignificant. But once that corner is clean, you feel a little lighter. That small win gives you a bit of energy. Maybe you put one more thing away. Then you take out the trash. Soon, the whole room looks better, all because you moved one object. A tiny action that took seconds created progress that might have taken hours if you had waited for motivation. This domino effect happens because action creates momentum. When you start, your brain shifts from stillness to movement. Movement feels good. It builds confidence, and confidence encourages more action. What begins as a small choice becomes a series of choices that add up to real change. The most powerful part of the domino effect is that it doesn't depend on force. It depends on direction. You don't have to push harder. You just have to tip the first piece. Once that piece falls, the rest follow naturally. A tiny start becomes a cascade, turning a little moment into meaningful progress. In the end, the domino effect reminds you that greatness often begins with something humble. One push, one choice, one moment. That's all it takes to start a wave of change. Perfectionists struggle with starting because the moment they think about a task, they imagine the final result, and that picture feels intimidating. Instead of focusing on the first step, their minds jump to doing everything flawlessly. This creates pressure, fear, and self-criticism before they even begin. The task feels too big, too important, or too risky to start imperfectly, so they end up stuck at the starting line. Perfectionists also fear making mistakes. To them, mistakes feel like proof that they are not good enough. This fear turns even simple tasks into emotional weight. Starting becomes scary because it means facing the possibility of falling short. Rather than risk doing something wrong, they avoid doing anything at all. Another struggle is the belief that they must have the perfect plan. Perfectionists want to know every step, avoid every error, and predict every outcome. But real life doesn't work that way. Plans change, obstacles arise, and learning happens through action, not through planning alone. Waiting for the perfect plan often means waiting forever. Finally, perfectionists tie their identity to their performance. If the outcome isn't perfect, they feel like they aren't enough. That pressure creates hesitation, anxiety, and endless delay. But once perfectionists learn to value progress over flawlessness, starting becomes easier. A small, imperfect beginning becomes acceptable, even freeing. In the end, perfectionists struggle with starting not because they lack ability, but because they expect too much too soon. When they learn to lower the bar to just begin, everything becomes possible again. 2-minute actions work beautifully in areas like fitness, writing, and study, because they remove the pressure of doing something big. In fitness, a 2-minute action might be as simple as doing 10 squats, stretching your legs, or walking down the hallway and back. It's brief, but it wakes up your body and signals to your brain that movement is part of your identity. In writing, a 2-minute action could be opening your notebook and writing one sentence. Not a whole page, not a perfect paragraph, just a single line. That tiny step breaks the fear of the blank page and turns writing into a doable action instead of an overwhelming task. For studying, a 2-minute action might be reading one paragraph of your textbook, reviewing a flashcard, or opening your notes and highlighting one key point. It's enough to get your brain warmed up without triggering resistance. These tiny beginnings don't just move you forward. They transform how you feel about the task. Once you start, momentum usually takes over. 2 minutes becomes 5. 5 becomes 10. And soon you've done far more than you expected, all because you were willing to begin small. Here is a simple 2-minute confidence-building exercise that anyone can do, anytime, anywhere. 2-minute confidence reset. Start by sitting or standing up straight. Lift your chest slightly and relax your shoulders. Take one slow, deep breath in, and then breathe out just as slowly. This tells your brain that you are safe and in control. Next, think of one thing, just one, that you did well in the last 24 hours. It doesn't have to be big. Maybe you kept a promise to yourself, handled a small task, or showed kindness to someone. Say it quietly to yourself. I did that. Let the truth of it settle in for a moment. Then, place your hand on your chest and say one short, encouraging sentence. Keep it simple and believable, like, I can handle today, or I'm getting better, or I can take the next step. Speak it gently, not like a command, but like a reminder. Finally, take one tiny action towards something you care about. Open a document, drink a glass of water, send a message, or stand up and stretch. This small act teaches your brain that you are capable of moving forward. In just 2 minutes, you've shifted your posture, your breathing, your thoughts, and your actions, all of which send a powerful message. I can trust myself. Jordan's life didn't change through one big decision. It changed through a series of tiny beginnings, small actions that felt almost too simple to matter. For years, he felt overwhelmed by everything he wanted to improve. He wanted to get healthier, be more organized, and finally work on the creative projects he kept putting off. But every time he thought about making a change, the goals felt too big, and he didn't know where to start, so he didn't. One morning, after feeling especially stuck, he decided to try something different. Instead of planning a full workout, he did 10 slow squats beside his bed. It took less than 30 seconds, but he felt a small spark of energy he hadn't felt in a long time. The next day, he did the same thing. No pressure, just a tiny start. A week later, he added another micro start, clearing one item from his desk each morning. Not the whole desk, just one thing. Little by little, the clutter disappeared, and he felt a sense of calm returning to his space. That sense of order made it easier to sit down and focus. Then he applied the same idea to his dream of writing. Instead of planning to write a chapter, he told himself to write one sentence a day. Sometimes it was a short sentence, Sometimes it grew into a paragraph. A few times, he surprised himself and wrote for 20 minutes. But even on the smallest days,